Education Subcommittee is called to order. Members, please make sure that you're logged in. And Mr. Clerk, if you'll give us our button so we can take the roll. Chairman White. All right, thank you. Mr. Clerk, take the roll, please.
Mr. Chairman, we have all members present. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Today, we have two bills before the committee. I'd remind the committee members that afterwards that we do have a presentation from both the Department of Education and the Department of Safety. So make sure that you stay for that as well and plan for that. Item number 1 on the calendar, House Bill 64 by Representative Bolso. Do I have a motion?
Motion, second.
Properly motioned, properly seconded. Representative Bolso, you are, I see that you have an amendment. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it is.
And could you give us that drafting code, please?
003452.
That is what we have here. Motion and second on the amendment. Members, this does rewrite the bill. Without objection, we'll vote to place the amendment on the bill. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? And the ayes have it. And so your bill is properly amended, House Bill 64 with Amendment 3452. And if you'll give us an explanation of your bill as amended.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a bill that came to me from one of our constituents that arises out of an experience that his teenage daughter had this past summer. His teenage daughter was enrolled in a summer program at a local private university. And as part of that program, the parents were asked whether they would mind if their daughter were assigned a transgender roommate. And they, of course, objected because they wanted their daughter to be in roommates with another girl. What they did not know and what was not disclosed to them, however, was that the school was going to allow boys who, quote, identified, close quote, as girls to share the same showering and restroom facilities on the floor of the dormitories where the students would be housed. Which obviously was something that they were not aware of and did not agree to. And the purpose of this bill, Mr. Chairman, in committee, is just to see to it that this does not continue to happen in the state of Tennessee. We want to protect girls, protect young ladies and their privacy and security in spaces like restrooms and shower facilities. And so I put together HB 64 as a means to make sure that wherever you have a residential educational program, any restrooms that are multi-occupant must be segregated by sex. And I'll mention that in discussions with the Attorney General's office, it was their suggestion that we include the words that are part of the amendment, multi-occupancy, to make it explicitly clear that the bill does not affect just single-user restrooms. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm ready for questions.
Thank you, Representative Bolso. And we do have someone who has signed up to speak regarding the bill. And without objection, we'll go out of session is Bean Chapman. And hopefully I have that correct, the name correct. If you'll come up, excuse me. Okay, there you go. If you'll come up and you can sit at any one of those seats at the table. And with our new microphone system, you don't have to touch anything. Once you get there, we'll get your microphone turned on and you'll have 3 minutes for your testimony. And your microphone will be cut off after 3 minutes after you state your name, all right?
Okay. My name is Bean Chapman. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I'm a policy analyst with the Disability Equality Project and here to urge members of this committee to vote no on this harmful bill. It endangers transgender, non-binary, and intersex students and adults that educate them in residential private schools, all colleges and universities, special schools, programs, and camps. It paints a broad stroke of government control into private spaces and will lead to harassment and violence This will also embolden an already vigilante-style enforcement mechanism that's in place. I do want to say something I say regularly, that these laws are based on an unsophisticated understanding of the normal diversity in human biology. There are over 40 genetic intersex traits in human beings. That is a normal variation. And it's a reductionist attempt to conveniently categorize real people in either one or the other box. The other name for that is eugenics. Contrary to the myths swirling around this body in presidential executive orders and Project 2025, transgender and non-binary people who are at risk in restroom facilities, and they experience very high lifetime risks of rape, sexual assault, and other violence perpetrated against them. I know these people personally. I am someone who has experienced rape and sexual assault by multiple cisgender men. Never a trans woman, never a trans man. This bill, like the other 20 or so anti-LGBTQ laws in the state's anthology of bad laws, threatens people in public and private spaces. And the reality is only around 900 youth might request gender-assigned restrooms in any school, and over 26% of trans and non-binary students report experiencing sexual assault, more than twice cisgender peers. Speaking briefly personally, as a private school parent, what this looks like in action is every person in the school, cafeteria workers, administrators, teachers, other kids, who are surveilling individual students throughout every single day and reporting their behavior and where they are and what they're doing and what they're wearing, who they're speaking to. It's sickening. It's also horrible to watch. It also means that we have segregated bathrooms because some buildings may not have a bathroom that they can use, or they may relegate them to the basement bathroom. I tell you this is fact. This is my experience. And what makes me sick about this, when I was a parent of a student and still today, is that this is because there is an adult obsession with children's genitals. That's the word that needs to be used. When we talk about gender and sex in these bills, we're talking about flesh.
Thank you. That's 3 minutes. Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Yes. Thank you for your testimony. And I would remind members of the audience, we're certainly thankful that you're here, but make sure that there aren't any distracting noises. I noticed that our speaker was distracted a little bit by some noises. We need to make sure that we have opportunity to debate the bill and so that members can hear what is said. The one who gave the testimony, being, were there any members that had questions for? All right, seeing none, without objection, we're back in session. And Representative Bolso, do you have anything that you'd like to state before we open up for questions for our members?
I do not, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, with that being said, Representative Glenn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Boso, does this bill put any food on the table?
You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, it does not.
Money in Tennessee? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yes, let's make sure we're not having a running debate. Representative Glenn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Does it put any money in Tennesseans' pockets?
Representative Bolso?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, it does not.
Representative Glenn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What about a roof over their head?
Sponsor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, there's no provision in the bill about a roof.
Do you have any follow-up, Representative Glenn? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, we come up here and part of our responsibility as legislators is to really and truly try to make the lives of Tennesseans better. At least that's what I came up here for. It was not to be hateful. It was not to be spiteful. It was not to continually attack folks because I don't agree with them. That's not what I came up here for. Because the one thing I've learned in my time is I can't go to heaven or hell for anybody. I'm only responsible for myself. So when I think about the attacks constantly on folks we don't agree with because we don't like their lifestyle, it's really disheartening that we continue to do that. But yet, we've done nothing to put food on people's table, money in their pocket. We're still at $7.25 an hour. Roofs on their head, help them when they're sick. We've done nothing to create a healthcare system that's affordable to all Tennesseans. But yet, we continue this ongoing battle to demonize folks we don't agree with. It's as if we are back in slavery days when folks continue to demonize Black folks because they didn't look the right way, they didn't act the right way, or whatever that reason is. I don't have to agree with everything someone does, but this ideal of just continuing to attack, and I say that because you and I came in about the same time, we're both on our second election. And I'll be honest with you, that's all I've seen from you.
Representative Glenn, yeah, let's stay on the bill and
Okay.
let's start, make personal statements. Thank you, Representative Glenn. You're
Th-
recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and sorry about that. But so I would say the ideal of just continuing this path that we're on as legislators.
Representative Glenn, do you have a question regarding
At this
the
point-
House Bill 64?
Yes, I have one more question. And when you were speaking on the school and you mentioned the shower piece, you said they did not agree on that. So it was something that they did not know about, I'm assuming. Is that what you said?
Representative Bolso?
Yes, Representative Glenn, what I said was that the parents had declined the school's invitation to assign a, quote, transgender, close quote, roommate to their daughter. And they later learned that the school nevertheless allowed boys who identified as girls to share the shower and restroom facilities. So this is not a bill that's born of hate in any degree. It's born out of love for girls, love for young ladies, love for the dignity of both boys and girls. And obviously, you, Representative, may have constituents in your district that see things differently from the way many of my constituents do. But I'm here to represent my constituents. And my constituents tell me that they believe that girls, when they're going into the bathroom or into a shower, deserve privacy and security such that only other girls are allowed to share those same facilities. They don't want boys in there, and in part because of what happened with this event that I related to the committee at the outset of my presentation. The boys who were identifying as girls at this particular residential educational program were actively flirting with some of the girls in the bathroom. I mean, so this is something that needs to be stopped. And as long as there's a need to protect girls and young ladies and their privacy and security, you can bet I will be here to bring bills to represent them.
Follow up, Representative Glenn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You keep saying that they did not agree. So it sounds like they already had something in place to ensure that this didn't happen if they did not agree to do this, or because you're saying they did not agree or they didn't know, they said no. So apparently the school was already aware that they didn't want to do this. The school was already aware that they didn't want this intersect or whatever the case was in the bathroom. So if they already had it in place, what is the purpose of this legislation if they're already doing this?
Representative Bolso?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, there might be some lack of communication, Representative Glenn. The school always intended to do what it actually did, so far as I know. My reference was to the parents. It was never disclosed to the parents that this school was going to allow boys into the girls' restrooms and showers. That's what I meant when I said that the parents did not know about it, nor did they agree to it.
Next on the list, Representative Sapicki.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so, Representative Bolsa, I got some questioning here I want to ask you, okay? I'm looking at the policy you have before us. When it was first written, I was assuming that this was just in K through 12 public education. And when you read and get into this, it covers a broad spectrum in the private sector. And so the first problem we're running up against is in TCA code, residential education program is not defined. The way you have it written right now, it's extremely broad and encompassing to where not only you would have private colleges or universities, you could have daycares, you could have mental health facilities, juvenile detention centers. Some of those are funded with public dollars and some of those aren't. The ones that are funded with public dollars could potentially draw down grant money from the state to help to meet your spirit of the bill if they have to create a unisex bathroom to allow for that accommodation. The private sector would not. Now, when we passed the school safety bill, we provided public funds to public and private entities. In your bill, from what I access, it does not say there's a fiscal note, correct?
Sponsor.
Correct.
Representative Sapicki.
Thank you very much. Can you expand on residential educational programs and what your intent was when you wrote this bill to be restrictive to a certain entity or allow it to be as broad as it's written right now?
Representative Bolso.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And yes, Chairman Sapicki, I can respond to every bit of that. First, note that it concerns residential education programs. So it's not just limited to a geographic place or a building. And obviously, those are words that are in common usage in the English language. Residential, if you have a residence, that means you live somewhere. So this is the type of a program where the students go and they're spending the night. They're living there for some duration, however short, however long. And when you look at, in particular, Justice Antonin Scalia's 2012 work, Reading Law, the interpretation of legal texts, one of the points that he makes is that it's the obligation of the court system to give a, quote, fair, close quote, reading to any legislation, which is what we're dealing with here. And what judges do is they take an aptitude with language, they combine that with ordinary prudence, and they put aside and they suppress any type of personal preference as to the outcome, and they interpret text in accordance with its plain language. And looking at this and thinking about whether the term should be defined, after looking at this in some detail, I decided no, that actually the term residential educational program is sufficiently defined in terms of plain and ordinary meaning that reasonable users of the statute, reasonable judges interpreting the statute will know what it means. And when you look at the three specific chapters in Title 49 that it concerns, chapters 6, 7, and 50, that's by design. We want this to apply to elementary, middle, and secondary schools. We want it to apply to post-secondary schools. In fact, as I explained earlier, the reason for this bill came about through a post-secondary summer educational program. And then third, Chapter 50 obviously deals with private schools. And obviously because it's a matter of public health and safety, this is one of those areas where it's appropriate to have legislation that goes across the board to protect girls and young ladies, no matter whether it's a public or a privately run facility. So that was the essence, Chairman Sapicki, of my rationale in drafting the bill the way that it's written.
Follow-up, Chairman Sapicki.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so the intent of the legislation is to include all those other categories, the mental health facilities, the juvenile detention centers. Is that the intent of to be all encompassing to all of these situations that deal with residential education programs?
Chairman Balso?
Mr. Chairman, no. The language is very clear that it has to involve minors, first of all. Okay, and it has to be a residential education program. So, when you refer to a specific type of location or a building, it really just depends, because one could conduct a residential educational program in any type of facility. And what the bill is designed to do is to make sure that when you present and you sponsor an educational program that involves minors, wherever you do it in the state of Tennessee, that you simply have to make sure that girls' restrooms and showers are segregated by sex for their security and their privacy.
Chairman Sapiki?
No, Mr. Chairman, if there's other people who want to speak, I'll come back if I need to.
I don't have anybody else on the list.
It's okay, I'll keep going.
Yes, Chairman Sapiki, you're recognized.
So in a juvenile detention center, we would all agree that those are minors, juvenile detention center. And they provide, through the state of Tennessee, education in those facilities, which means a juvenile detention center who receives state money to help pay for those facilities during their housing, that juvenile detention center would have a clear advantage to meeting the language in your bill, because they could use state funds to help subsidize the cost of getting in compliance. But if you make, and I'm just going to use as an example, Mr. Chairman, a Belmont University, which is a private institution, if they want to meet the compliance of your bill by building what's what I'm looking for, I went blank, what is it? Like a changing area, that they would have to incur the cost of maybe building another part into the area or another locker room in the area to meet the spirit of your bill, which means how do we get them in equal protection under the law there? We've got a public institution that receives public money and a private institution that doesn't, but they both have to mesh and adhere to the law. One's going to incur a cost to meet this bill. The other one could receive a grant from the state to do this, because I'm unaware of any grant program we have right now that's been voted on that would allow private institutions to pull money down to meet the spirit of this law. Can you address that?
Chairman Balso?
Chairman Sapiki, I can address that in two ways. First, recognize that there are a host of statutes that we have on the books that apply to private institutions that deal with issues of public health and safety. And it's never been the case that the state provide money to private entities or private individuals to comply with statutes. I mean, for example, you've got zoning regulations to comply with. You've got fire code regulations to comply with. You've got firearms regulations to comply with. You've got other building and inspection trade requirements that private institutions must comply with. And there's never been an occasion that I can think of where it would either be necessary or appropriate for the state of Tennessee to provide funds to private entities to construct their buildings. And the second point I'll make is simply that when you take a case of a private university, obviously there are public funds in some sense going into the school, because you have students who are bringing with them Pell Grants and other types of funds from both federal and state dollars, probably Hope scholarships. So to say that an entity that is privately owned and privately operated doesn't have public funds coming in is probably not entirely accurate in most cases.
Follow up?
Most recently, we just passed a school safety grant to provide funds to both public and private entities to meet the spirit of the law, to prevent the situation at Covenant or Antioch, to provide funds for them based off of their assessment. There are schools across the state, private schools, who took advantage of this and received funding from the state to build actual brick and mortar structures and facilities to harden the facilities. So the state has acknowledged through that they are willing to spend public dollars in private entities to allow those private schools to meet the spirit of the law that was passed by the General Assembly. I see no funding mechanism there for your Belmonts or for your Vanderbilts or your Lipscombs or your Trevecas across the state that would have no access to be able to meet the spirit of your law. They would have to incur expenses outside of that. How do you square that? We just passed a bill that allowed those private universities to meet the spirit of the law with the school safety grants.
Chairman Bosso?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Subcommittee, I would square it this way. If I recall the bill that you're talking about, it provided funds for SROs and other safety enhancements. There was no requirement that private institutions hire an SRO or do anything specifically with their physical plants. So it's a very different set of circumstances where on one occasion, you've got state dollars available to enhance security measures of students at private schools on the one hand, and here just passing a more historical and customary public health and safety law that is going to be a requirement of both, public institutions, private institutions, anyone who maintains or presents an educational program where minors are going to be living there.
And so I agree with you on the school safety grant and the SRO grant. At the private school level, it was their option. This provides no option. It is compliance. They have to do it, which means you are putting an unfunded mandate on private institutions, which this body has been very careful with, of imposing our will on private businesses or private schools to maintain their autonomy and freedom to educate or do whatever they want. This bill, and I know you're arguing on safety, this bill steps into a realm that this General Assembly, since I've been part of, has been very careful about not stepping it over the bounds of the separation of private from the government. And so I'm wrestling with this right now, and I wish we had more time to talk about this with you, so that we could come to a committee to make sure that we feel confident. I feel confident that I'm not overstepping my boundaries in something that I do believe in. I've sponsored and co-sponsored many of the bills that you've run up here, and some on my own. I just want to make sure that we're in the proper position here. And maybe by tweaking some language, we could get in a better position to where the private schools, if they're going to opt into this or not opt in, if they are going to comply with this, maybe they have an ability to pull down some grant funding to meet the needs of safety. Because you're saying it's safety, which means we're trying to provide a safe environment. If the state's saying to do this, maybe we have an obligation to come in there and say, okay, here's some funding for this.
Chairman Bosso?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think, Chairman Subcommittee, there's one thing that it's important to point out, and that your question, presumes that there's going to be some cost of compliance to anyone if this is passed. Recall that 20 years ago, every institution educationally that dealt with minors likely had a boys' bathroom and a girls' bathroom. I believe that is still the case. The private university that I referred to at the outset is such a place. And so it's not so much that anything needs to be built. It's just a question of who is allowed to use which restroom facility and which showering facility. So the bill does not require any type of construction or modification. It simply requires that anyone who presents a residential education program that involves minors must respect the privacy and security of girls and young ladies, so that the bathrooms are continuing to be segregated by sex, which is, I believe, the case in probably more than 95% of the places in Tennessee. So I certainly understand the basis for the question, but the notion that somehow this is going to impose financial and monetary requirements on anyone, I think, is not something that's supported by the language of this bill.
Follow up?
Unless somebody else has another question.
Anyone else? Okay.
So in the language, if a residential dormitory has a transgender individual that would force compliance with this, right? What if a dormitory in the same school doesn't have one? Do they still have to comply?
Chairman Bolsa?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure I understand that. What if a dormitory doesn't have what?
So it says, all residential education programs of state, regardless of type of duration, that allows minors to participate or access in residential facilities must segregate, okay? If the solution to the problem is that they have the ability to build a unisex bathroom, that was the word I was looking for, a unisex bathroom. Would they still have to comply with this? If one dormitory has to comply, could another dormitory not have to comply because the issue's not addressed?
Chairman Bolsa?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the answer to that question is yes. As long as you are going to have the minors at the location where it's segregated, you could have other locations that would be unisex. And recall, this only deals with multi-occupancy, not single occupancy. So you could designate any particular single-user bathroom as unisex. That it would fall outside the scope. So I believe the answer to your question, Chairman, is yes.
Okay, follow up?
And so I'm trying to get there, okay? This next one came from a mom. In this bill, if a mother is visiting a member in the a child in the dormitory, and that mother has a 4-year-old child with them of the opposite sex, a male child, and that 5-year-old has to use the restroom, does this bill allow, the way it's written, for that mother to take that 5-year-old boy into the girls' bathroom to use the restroom?
Chairman Bolsa?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The short answer, Chairman, is yes. And let me go back to Justice Scalia, because of the requirement that the judiciary faces when faced with language of the statute is giving it a fair reading. And historically, throughout this entire country, if you had a boy's bathroom and a girl's bathroom, you had a mother that had a 5-year-old or a 4-year-old little boy, their mother would naturally take the little boy into the girl's bathroom. This changes nothing about that whatsoever. It would be a very unfair reading of the statute to try to draw the conclusion that it would be impermissible for a educational program to prohibit the circumstance that you've just mentioned.
Anyone else? Okay, I see no other questions. Without objection, we are ready to vote. Do you have a question? Chairman White, you recognize?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Bolso, being the line of questioning that Representative Pickey brought up, do you feel comfortable that this committee, looking at the members on here, I understand what you're doing, and this is something before us always right now. Do you feel comfortable that we don't need to do some more work on this as far as make sure that his questions are answered? Would you have any objection to give us a little more time to vet this at this point in time?
Chairman Bolsa?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think respectfully, Chairman White, I think the answer would be yes. I think that I've adequately answered Chairman Sapicki's questions. I think it's a very simple issue. All this bill does is do what this country has done for several hundred years, which is that you have boys' bathrooms and you have girls' bathrooms, and you do not allow those who are in charge of minors to put boys in girls' bathrooms. It's no more complicated than that, although others might try to make it more complicated. That's all that this does. And so I don't think there's any language that needs to be changed. I don't think there's any further fiscal review that needs to be made. I think we simply have to recognize and understand what happened, what gave rise to this legislation, and see that it actually does what it's intended to do. It just requires that if you have control educationally of a residential program where you've got minors, you do not allow boys to go into the girls' bathrooms. That's all that it does.
Chairman White?
And I totally don't disagree with you on that. I've told you when I talked to you earlier on that, I get what you're trying to do. And I agree with that. My question is not about that issue. My question is about putting us as a committee, putting in place policy when we do have questions about how it does affect. And so all I'm asking is, Mr. Chairman, can I just make a motion and then the committee can vote up or down? Okay, that's all.
Okay. Any other questions from committee members? All right, seeing none, without objection, we are voting on House Bill 64 as amended, and record your votes. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Mr. Chairman, you have 5 ayes, 1 no.
House Bill 64 moves on to full Ed Administration Committee. The calendar is item number 2. To order. Item number 2, House Bill 382 by Representative Butler. Do I have a motion? Second, properly motioned, properly seconded. Representative Butler, I see that there is an amendment. Can you give us that drafting code, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's 3393.
Motion and second on the amendment. It is Amendment 3393. All those in favor of putting it on the bill, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Amendment 3393 goes on to House Bill 382, and you are recognized on your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll clarify the amendment first. All the amendment does is make this optional to the school system so that it is not mandatory. When the original bill was drafted, it was not drafted with the intent, even though they drafted it that way to make it mandatory. So the amendment just simply removes the requirement and makes it optional for a school system to use the law enforcement against drugs and violent program and or the DARE program. So it simply changes the code to allow either or to be used. And I'll be glad to share with you a little bit about the LEAD program. It has over 450 instructors across the state of Tennessee. It is present in 45 Tennessee counties right now. It's an evidence-based drug prevention program. It has a regional director that is a former post-certified law enforcement officer. It is to develop a full-time prevention specialist who continually update and revise the delivery model and evaluate the program's effectiveness to remain current with the latest prevention science and research, as well as education trends and priorities. Plus, its self-efficiency and interpersonal skills developed to work through fun and interactive lessons, building the self-confidence young people need to make healthy choices and achieve success. Promotes positive, pro-social attitudes and behavior while fostering healthy relationships, resistance to substance abuse and conflict, resistance to negative peer pressure and influences. Mitigates risk factors and promotes resiliency through the development of these skills and traits: goal setting, decision-making, effective communication, anger management, media literacy, conflict resolution, and pro-social bonding. I would ask for your support on this legislation, as I think it will be a good tool to allow our education to use this option in the classrooms for drug prevention and awareness for our children. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll take.
Thank you, Representative Butler. Any questions? Representative Sapicki, you're recognized.
Thank you. To the best of your knowledge, can you compare and contrast the dare and lead? Are they pretty much the same?
Representative Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess that would come down to a personal preference. This is a research-based program, so this is tried and tested methods that have been shown to work over a decade. So one might argue that this would be better than the DARE program. It's more current and potentially offers better opportunities to reach our children.
Any follow-up?
And the program is optional. You can choose either one.
Mr. Chairman, yes, this would allow an educational and LEA to choose either program, or they could have their own program, I assume.
Any other questions for the sponsor? Seeing none, without objection, we are voting on House Bill 382 as amended. All those in favor, please register your vote. Does anybody wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Mr. Chairman, you have 6 ayes, 0 nays.
Your bill goes on to full education, House Bill 382.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee.
All right, thank you. Members, with that, we will go, unless there's any other business before we go out of session, we will go out of session. And I would call up representatives from the Department of Education and the Department of Safety. And what we'll do, I think we have enough chairs and microphones, do we? Yes, we do. If each of you will just choose where you'd like to be seated. And Mr. Powers, with the Department of Education, is there someone from the department who is going to speak first? Is that correct? Who's going? Okay, there we go. Glad to have Shannon Gordon with us here, who is the Chief Operating Officer with the Department of Education. And you are recognized. Please state your name, and you know the drill. You don't have to push the button anymore, so there you go. It'll be taken care of up here. Thank you.
Thank you. Shannon Gordon, Chief Operating Officer, Tennessee Department of Education. The General Assembly have been vital partners in working with the Department of Education and the Department of Safety and Homeland Security and our other state agency partners to make our schools safe havens for both learning and growth. Annually, the Commissioner of Education and Safety jointly report to both the Governor and the General Assembly on implementation and compliance with the SAVE Act. This report highlights a summary of serious incidents in our schools. It updates on state-level initiatives and requirements related to school safety. And it updates on state-level initiatives and requirements related to school safety. Our slide deck provides committee members a summary of that report, which we are not going to read to you today. Instead, Chairman Slater has asked our agencies to spend a few minutes to highlight the ongoing work at the state and the local level to support school safety. And this will leave time to answer your questions related to both the report and our ongoing work related to school safety. I'm going to kick it off and then ask our partners at the Department of Safety to share the important work that they're doing to support our schools and safety across the state of Tennessee. The terms school safety and security are often used interchangeably, but they have very distinct meanings. School safety is a focus on prevention. It emphasizes creating a safe environment through preventative measures like anti-bullying programs, mental health support, and fostering a positive school culture. It includes inclusive local policies. It involves all stakeholders, students, teachers, parents, and the community coming together and creating a collaborative approach to safety. It addresses health and well-being. It addresses physical and emotional health and includes providing resources for counseling and frequently addressing mental health services that often occur outside of the school building and the school day. And we've seen an ongoing commitment by both the governor and the General Assembly in supporting the mental health needs of our schools through regional health liaisons. School safety also addresses emergency preparedness. This includes plans and drills for things like natural disasters, health crises, and non-violent emergencies, in addition to emergency events like active shooters. It includes addressing supportive learning environments. It aims to create a nurturing atmosphere where students feel safe, supported, and valued, thereby reducing risky behaviors. School security, on the other hand, addresses physical security measures. It involves things like installing security hardware, such as cameras, metal detectors, and security entry systems. The General Assembly passed bills to secure vestibules, to add window films, to ensure locked doors. The governor and the General Assembly assured that Tennessee would be one of the only states in the United States that had a school resource officer funded in every public school in the state to monitor and address potential threats. School security involves access control, focusing on controlling who enters and exits the building, using identification badges, visitor check-ins, and locked doors. It also involves crisis response. Plans for immediate responses to violent incidents, including lockdown procedures and coordination with local law enforcement, both before an emergency occurs, while it's occurring, and afterwards. It involves incident reporting, ensuring protocols for reporting and managing security incidents to ensure a prompt and effective response. It ensures that we learn when an emergency occurs how to do it better, so we don't make the same mistakes twice. School safety has a broader focus, addressing emotional and psychological aspects, while school security is more about physical measures and response to threats. Safety is proactive, aiming to prevent issues before they arise. Security is often reactive, designed to deal with threats as they happen, using a plan that has been established in advance with local law enforcement and is practiced and practiced again. Stakeholder involvement is critical. Safety initiatives often involve a wider community effort, while security measures may primarily involve law enforcement, emergency response personnel, and security professionals. Effective school safety can lead to a more positive and inclusive school culture, whereas robust security measures aim to protect students and staff from immediate harm. We know, as you do, both are required to support the safety of students, staff, and communities today. Neither can be undertaken without the support of all stakeholders working together. As the reports highlight, LEAs are required to do a number of things to support this work. Local school districts are required to have a SAVAC coordinator who serves as the school district's single point of contact on school safety. They are required to execute a number of drills annually. Fire, including the new delayed fire alarm response passed by the General Assembly last year. Bus safety, active shooter training, earthquake training, depending on where you live in the state, as well as the optional shelter-in-place drills. They are required to have emergency operation plans designed with input from local law enforcement, These are confidential plans with public-facing components that include annual training of students and staff, including substitute teachers. They are required to conduct annual safety assessments done in conjunction now with the Department of Safety and Homeland Security. They are required to share their building plans with local law enforcement annually to assist with emergency response planning and preparation. They're required to have threat assessment teams. Threat assessments are supposed to be a graduated process calibrated to the seriousness of a problem, since the majority of student threats are not credible and can be resolved through supportive interventions, according to research from the Secret Service. The district interviews students before convening the team to assess whether a threat is a misguided expression of anger or frustration, and if the student has a plan and a means to carry out violence. Students whose threats are deemed transient receive support, such as help with coping skills, and they may meet with a mental health provider. If the threat is credible, a student may be temporarily removed from the classroom or school. Many of the kids who make threats are suicidal or despondent. The process is designed primarily to figure out if someone is in crisis and how we can help. It is not designed to be punitive. Intervention plans are developed and remain with that student until it is determined that they are no longer a threat. And the Department of Safety will talk in a few minutes more about that process. Schools are assigned SROs by local law enforcement and must maintain locked doors. At the state, we support school safety and security measures through a number of initiatives, through training, collaboration, through guidance, through grant administration, through monitoring and compliance, through emergency response support, through technical assistance as requested on a number of topics and issues based on our speciality of our different agencies, whether that's through mental health, through the Department of Education, through safety, or our partners at Commerce and Insurance. Now I'd like to introduce Mr. Mays at Safety to talk a little bit about their work.
You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Greg Mays. I'm the Deputy Commissioner for the Tennessee Office of Homeland Security. As you know, we have a very big role in school security around the state. I won't rehash what Ms. Gordon said, but essentially we view school security as three pillars. The first one is physical security, as she mentioned, cameras, doors being locked, that kind of thing. The second one is proper training so that if we do have an incident, we respond like the heroic officers at Metro PD did to the Covenant shooting versus the less than ideal response we saw in Texas a few years ago at Uvalde. So physical security and training. And then what I view as one of the most important components is the behavioral-based threat assessment. We want to reach these troubled kids who are on a pathway to violence before they act out. There are studies that demonstrate the effectiveness of these kind of intervention programs. One was just referred to. The National Threat Assessment Center recently released a study called the Averted School Attack Study. 67 different averted school attacks were looked at, and in 94% of the cases, they were stopped because the prospective shooter told somebody he was going to do it, and there was an intervention. And in the other 6% where the prospective shooter didn't say anything, he was behaving so oddly that someone noticed and reported. So in 100% of those cases, we know that intervention can stop an act of violence. So as you know, Mr. Chairman, the General Assembly approved a large funding increase for Homeland Security. We got that money in 2023, in July of 2023, to put a Homeland agent in every county. We spent much of 2024 the rest of 2023 and into 2024, hiring people and training and getting people in place. And we are staffing today. We are almost fully staffed. I have one more Homeland Agent class scheduled for March, and I've got 15 special agents lined up to attend that class. And when they get through with that, we will be almost completely staffed, but for one or two here or there with attrition. So we are in every county. In our more metropolitan areas where population is dense, we have more than one Homeland Agent in every county. And they are conducting these behavioral-based threat assessments. We're receiving reports of school threats. And when we talk about a school threat, we're talking about capability and intent. That's the definition of a threat. And for a lot of law enforcement officers, they think of probable cause, right? And I know many of you are attorneys and you're thinking about, what do I need to make an arrest? But when our Homeland Agents go out, they're not focused on probable cause or an arrest. They're focused on capability and intent. And does this person intend to carry out an act of violence, and how far down the road towards that are they? And then what can we do to intervene? And intervention looks different in different cases. We believe in this behavioral-based team, we believe in this multidisciplinary threat assessment and partnership. Sometimes a kid is being bullied and needs to be removed from that situation. Sometimes there is trouble at home and desperation, and sometimes there's mental illness involved. Many things can be involved, but what's important is that we take proactive action and we intervene. It is easy to take credit for the bomb that doesn't go off or the gun that's not fired, and it's difficult for me to point to, I've prevented this school shooting or prevented that one. But we do believe that our efforts are making a difference. We have encountered a number of kids across the state where we think our intervention it's reasonable to believe that it's averted acts of violence. So we're excited about the partnership we have with education. We're excited about the work the Homeland Agents are doing in the field. And with that, I think I'll just stop, and if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. Questions, members? Chairman Sapicki?
First of all, thank you for coming here. I think it's very timely that you've come before this committee to talk about this. And anybody can answer this question. I just want to understand. So does Homeland Security Agent, do they do the school safety threat assessment? And if they do, where does that school safety threat assessment go to? That's the first question.
Chairman Mays, or not chairman, but Deputy Commissioner Mays. There you go.
Thank you for the promotion, sir. And thank you for the question, sir. The schools do a self-assessment, which is a checklist, essentially. The checklist is developed by my office, and the schools, there are roughly 1,860 K through 12 schools, and so each one does their own self-assessment. If the Homeland Agent in that county is available, they will go with the school administrators or the SRO or whatever who does it. We can't always be at every school when the assessment is done. We review a certain number per year. Last year, we reviewed 351. We're on track this school year to do 400 of them, okay? Now, to answer your question, I think you said, where do they go? They are sent to us, I believe, and we retain them. And we put out a report of trends that we see to try to make connections of where we see trends and vulnerabilities. For example, lots of unlocked doors or lots of missing cameras, something like that.
Follow up?
So, and you'll see my line of questioning here, is we put money into the school safety bill for our public schools and private schools to be able to pull funds down to secure their schools, be it the bullet-resistant film, cameras, locks, metal detectors. So I'm assuming in this safety threat assessment, some type of recommendation would be sent to the district, because then the next step would be is to apply for the grant. What's that next process? How do they get the information to apply for the grant, and then who does that go to?
Thank you for the question. The assessment, the checklist is graduated by very important things and less important things to help schools prioritize what their most important needs would be. It's designed to help a school administrator who has limited resources pick where the money should be spent. At that point, the decision is up to the school and they apply to the Department of Education for the funds.
It's a train here.
All right, go ahead.
And so, okay, so now it goes to the Department of Education. So you get a request for grant money based off the school safety assessment that now the Department of Education looks at this and grants the funds. What's the next step now?
So the grant that you're talking about, the General Assembly passed 2 sessions ago. And so the bulk of those funds have already been drawn down by districts. So most of those projects are now just wrapping up and being executed. And so it's a reimbursement grant. So districts had to have executed those projects, and they're just applying to us to get reimbursed for the funds they spent locally. And so they had to prioritize based on their safety assessment and feedback from the Department of Safety, their highest need projects. They had the ability over the course of the projects to reprioritize their needs based on changes, and they could resubmit a request to modify their grant if local conditions changed, and some districts did, as well as non-publics. But really, folks are just in the tail end of spending those, what I would call 2-year-old funds.
Recognized.
So if a district applied for a school safety grant, and let's say it was bullet resistant film or metal detectors for a particular school based off the assessment, who follows up from the department to make sure that those funds that were appropriated for those specific things for that school wind up in that school?
Because it's a reimbursement base, the district has to provide evidence that the funds were purchased for that. But my team, I have 8 regional safety liaisons that are out monitoring school districts and providing technical assistance and training. So they are also going out and reviewing the same documentation that the Department of Safety is doing. The Homeland agent provides feedback to my team on areas in need of improvement. We're more the compliance end. They're more the stakeholder partner end. And we do the follow-up on that work.
Recognized.
And so is it the Department of Safety's job or the Department of Education's job that under the school safety threat assessment that we provided state funds for certain things, for certain schools, and those are purchased, who goes and follow-ups to make sure that those things that were bought for those schools stay in those schools? Because you could buy a metal detector and it could be moved around for basketball games or football games or different schools. Who maintains that? Who maintains that the integrity of what the money was supposed to be spent for in that school to provide safety? Is it the Department of Education that goes behind to make sure it's there, or is it the Department of Safety to make sure it's there?
Sorry, sir.
No, you're good. Go ahead. Yes.
It would be the Department of Education, but under the terms of the grant, the LEA would have the flexibility based on its local needs to move that equipment around based on its safety needs. So if the LEA determined that it purchased metal detectors for school A and it was having an issue at school B, it would be within their purview to move those metal detectors to that other school because it had a higher need there. There would be nothing in the grant requirements that said they couldn't, based on their local need, move that equipment around because of changing safety requirements locally.
Chairman Subcommittee.
But wouldn't school B have their own threat assessment to call for metal detectors?
They might, I would identify that the funding for most districts isn't sufficient to meet all of their school needs. So
Okay.
LEAs had to prioritize based on highest need,
Okay.
and that the funding didn't stretch far enough. And so districts did the best they could to meet their highest needs, and that most districts are leveraging it to the best they can.
Okay.
And so it would not surprise me to see that they are using some of their tools and moving it around.
Last
Any-
question.
Okay, last question.
The school safety threat assessment and the grants that were granted, are those public information and available?
Yes, sir. We submit a report to you, all the General Assembly quarterly, on the status of both the SRO grant and the public and private school safety grant.
Let me, yeah, go ahead. And I think Department of Safety would like to comment there. And,
Right.
and you've not identified yourself yet. If you would do that, please. Thank you.
If I talk, there we go. Still learning the new system. Elizabeth Stroker, Legislative Director, Department of Safety. Wanted to add a little clarification there. The actual assessments themselves are not public information because that would obviously let the public know of any vulnerabilities that a school has. So while we can talk about how many we've done and things like that, we would never publicly give that assessment out just to prevent anyone using it inappropriately against that school.
Okay. You said the last one, but what, no, well, if you've got to finish that thought, or were you on some, yeah, okay.
And so as a legislator, we sign non-disclosure agreements all the time with departments. If we wanted to specifically see a school safety assessment and sign a non-disclosure, would you show it to a representative or senator?
You recognized?
I'd have to go back and confirm, but my understanding of the law, how it was written specifically in the school safety bill, is that we would not be able to disclose that to anyone who requested, even a legislator at this time.
Okay, thank you. Chairman White?
I think Chairman Speaker asked most of mine. So bottom line, no, appreciate it. So bottom line, we put codes in place and enforcement laws. We appropriate the money, but at the end of the day, when it gets down to the individual school system, whether it works or not, it's really up to them, right? That'd be a fair statement.
Who'd like to respond there? Just kind of hold the finger up and she can turn your mic on, so. Elizabeth? Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Annette. Are you talking about grant funding that goes out for security enhancements based on those threat assessments?
Right, everything we just displayed up here, went through the presentation. We provide the grant money. The schools buy the stuff, whatever that may be. But at the end of the day, if things happen, who's responsible?
You recognize.
We can only speak for the SRO grant itself because that's the one we have purview over, but we do have the flexibility and options that if those funds are used inappropriately for the SRO grant program are not being used how the legislature has prescribed, we have the authority to be able to go in and recoup that money or ask for additional accounting of that. I can't speak for the actual physical security grants that come through DOE, but at least for our part, we feel very confident that if someone is using that money inappropriately, that would be handled by the department.
Mr. Mays, did you want to chime in?
Thank you, Chairman White. I maybe understood the question a little differently. You were asking, were you asking in a broad sense, are we doing everything we can, or have we solved the problem of school security? And
No.
I would say no. We were in a constant effort, constant vigilance. One of the things that concerns me the most is that an example would be what happened in Antioch recently, where that school shooter had done all the things that all the pre-attack behaviors posted on social media, done things that would draw attention, and we could have intervened, except nobody told us, nobody reported it. None of his friends or people that saw it on social media said anything. So people ask me what kind of threat concerns me the most, and I always say it's the one I don't know about. So we're always struggling to make people create that, as Shannon mentioned, the warm and welcoming environment where kids feel like they can report threats so that we can act on them. And I don't know if that was the direction your question was going, but that's how I heard it. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for letting me weigh in.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And isn't there now an app that is available to the public? Is that, could you share with us that information, the app that's available?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's an app called SafeTN that the Tennessee Office of Homeland Security developed using federal grant dollars. What some of the National Threat Assessment Center studies told us is that kids that want to report will want to do so differently. Not everybody's the same. Some kids will talk to a coach or a parent or a teacher. Some kids aren't talking to anybody, but they'll be happy to text or put it on an app. So there's an app you can download from the App Store or wherever people get apps. I just go on my phone and download it, and it's called SafeTN. And when you open it up, it will walk you through prompts. Is this an emergency? You can call 911. Are you feeling suicidal or that kind of thing? It'll point you towards resources, or it'll say, do you want to report a threat towards a school? And it uses drop-down menus. It's anonymous. A lot of times the safety and inputs we get, people do include, the reporting party does include a name so we can call them, but often they don't. They're anonymous. They'll just say that the friend in my algebra class says he's going to bring a gun to school tomorrow. Here's the school. And we do the best we can. We immediately investigate all of them. We have a threat assessment center that's monitored 24/7. So those threats that come in off that SafeTN app, whether they're in the middle of the night or in the middle of the day, we'll act on them immediately. Some of the most challenging ones will come in, a few hours before school starts in the morning, and we'll be in communication with school, with the SRO, with the local law enforcement agency, the sheriff's office or police department, and our homeland agents will be out there trying to find this kid and to determine capability and intent. And are they on that pathway to violence?
Thank you. Did you have something, Representative Reedy? You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And of course, Ms. Gordon, members, I had quite a few roundtable discussions just about this situation, drafted some legislation trying to get my arms around it. And of course, I have the SafeTN app and I just pulled it up and showed Chairman Subcommittee. And then that brings me, it's a couple things through those meetings with behavior, mental health evaluations, all of such. Commissioner Mays, you brought up the early behavior detection. Is it just through this app or is there other, tell us how that works. If it's somebody in the school or maybe it was Antioch, somebody could have said something and picked that up. Do you have a database other than this app where somebody can go or educate us?
Thank you for the question. And it's a good question, and I'm glad you brought it up. There are multiple ways that we receive tips. We can receive them from the app. That's not how we get most of them, but we do get a fair amount every year. Most of them, I would say, come in through a local law enforcement referral or the school. A teacher or an SRO will say, hey, I just found out I've got a kid, he's a 10th grader who's, I hear he's got a gun, something like that. We also have a tip line. They'll come in by phone. We'll get other social media posts will come up that are not addressed to the Office of Homeland Security. There's just a Facebook post that says there's a threat, and often those we battle the hoax thing there with those. So we get them from all directions. And I actually encourage that. I don't want to be pigeonholed into getting threat streams via one particular communication method because I'm afraid it would silence others. Again, the one that concerns me the most is the one I don't know about, because we never ignore any kind of school threat. We will immediately investigate, and then some of them will resolve pretty quickly. You know, it was Junior didn't want to take his math test and he, you know, made a threat. But there are some that will be open cases for quite a while, and we'll be pulling in mental health professionals and juvenile court systems, anything we can do to try to get that person off the pathway to violence. I don't know if that answered your question sufficiently.
Representative Reedy?
It did, but it also creates a bigger question because it's the example, and of course it's terrible that it happened in Antioch, but like you had mentioned, there were so many red flags and they were never accumulated to a point to prevent the tragedy that took place. And then that's the question is there too many outlets that were trying social media, the app or local law enforcement? Everybody's picking up these little pieces and it was warning signs, but they never merged. They never come to a point that really made concern. And we're going to have further discussion this legislative session about it. And let me move through the discussion I was having in these roundtable discussions. It was the threat assessment team is writing up their report at that LEA, that particular middle school, wherever it's at. But it was brought up, and of course with Elizabeth, what you stated, I don't know how we could know that this is factual or not. So the local threat assessment team says, well, we wrote the threat down, we sent it to the state, but they only took bits and pieces of it. It wasn't the whole threat assessment team's response to that. And I'm just going to say, I hope that we catalog all that information and then you keep it because it's valuable information. The other thing that come to mind, and I spoke to one of my sheriffs, I've got a large house district, and the question came home that if that student, in other words, Chairman, with FERPA, all of a sudden this parent, this guardian has a problem youth, and it was Commissioner Williams, and she talked to me about this, and she said, Representative Reedy, if it is decided by the parent and the principal of that school, we will take care of the mental health evaluation, the cost of that, and it doesn't go on to the LEA, but it's important to us and we need to get that taken care of. But it's escaping me the name that there's 472 mental health professionals in some of our schools, but not all of them. And my wife's at Houston County High School, a teacher there, and she said, this young lady does a great job because if we see somebody straying, they will pull that young person out of the class. And she said, she's worked wonders. So with that, I'm sure with the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse, there was a big ask last night, say the state address, that we need to fund more. And I believe there's a total request. We want 1,800 of these mental health folks in our schools. Now, the challenge is it's all the universities trying to get these young people trained up for those positions. So we've got to be patient in the interim. So there is the difference in taking place there. Now, the conversation I had with my sheriff this summer, I said, okay, this was started in 2023. Threat assessment, the law is like, you don't do it, don't be stupid. I said, Sheriff, I said, how is Henry County trending higher or lower on school threats? And he says, oh, it's lower. I said, really? Because all I'm hearing from everybody in the news media that they're trending real high. And he said, well, we put out on social media, if you make a threat on social media, you're going to jail. And if your stupid friend shares it, he's going to go to jail with you. You know, I said, okay. So then the second thing with these threat assessment, and maybe this information for committee members, those who are watching, then it's left up to the director of school to decide, is that young person remote learning? It was just a hoax, let's move past it, or they're excused from that school for the whole year. And then I'm thinking, okay, I've got a rural county. It's good chance the director of school is a family member of somebody there. Will they stand up? And of course I was told, absolutely, the director of schools, they're tired of messing around with the SWAT teams, the bomb squads, everybody else, law enforcement, the cost that it's bringing to their communities on these threats. And so I said, great. But what's the challenge in education committee here is the funding. I said, the juvenile court judge, they have the right to request a mental health evaluation of that young person or even a 72-hour lockup. And in that 72-hour lockup, all of the costs of that goes to the LEA, to the county. So that's where I asked the sheriff, said, no, she's not willing to lock up these youth and mental health evaluation because of the financial cost to the county. So that's something that we need to try to understand and take care of at this same time. But it is a big issue. I'll just state a public record. I did not ask to be on the education committee, but Ms. Gordon, I think it's all my conversation this summer, and we drafted quite a few pieces of legislation that I'm here now, and so I'm going to step up to the plate and work with both of your departments, and we'll try to figure this out. Mental health is a problem in our country. Now, what's interesting, it was previously, the first meeting I went to, it was the Child Advocacy Center, and talking to these young ladies, do the forensic interviews of these children that are abused or whatever their situation is. And one thing, committee members, that struck me and it hit me hard, and was talking about the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse. Said in our country, if we could get our arms around the problem with drugs, with the substance abuse, mental health will take care of itself. And I really think that, because as a Christian, I just got to make this statement, and Mr. Chairman, I'll stop. We know that Jesus Christ knew why he was here. We knew how he was going to suffer. He knew how he was going to die. We don't. Every time that we're saddled with a crisis situation, a loving family member, or an accident, or disease, or whatever, we go into crisis mode, and then we try to become a recluse through drugs, alcohol, everything else, where we need to say, okay, I've got a mental health issue. I need help. And as a military veteran, we're losing too many good people. Active duty, retired. I'm also a farmer. Suicide rate for farmers, it's crazy. My wife being a school teacher, you see brilliant kids graduate high school, and today they're dead. Why? And that's our challenge. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Reedy, and thank you for coming in. We, as you can tell, I think we have the right committee here, and we have the Department of Safety, Department of Education today. Thank you so much for your presentation. It's not just these departments that that have to work together, build relationships. It is the Department of Mental Health as well. I think also Department of Commerce, and so these are ongoing conversations. We're going to get busy in this committee with bills and that type of thing. But I thought on this first day that we would have this presentation, and I think we struck a chord. Thank you so much for being here with us. Without objection, we'll go back into session. And if there is no objection, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn. We are adjourned.